Before we get into this cold open, if I wasn't holding this microphone, let me just clap my hands for my boys over at State. Not only for successfully beating the offseason and beating their season, but also for all my classmates that continue to play footy with back, for getting the Scarfood National Championship. Now going to Vegas to get the West Coast Championship. Very proud of them. Up the boys this week. I know I never played with back for a minute, but you know what? It's all up to them this weekend. Life West is a good team, but here we go. As for the rest of this festivities from last weekend, I was obviously very proud of the product. Again, would clap my hands, but holding this thing, I just loved what I saw. A lot of teams improved in ways that I wanted them to. There were a lot of winnable games that I think were screwed in the pooch towards about the 60th minute for most of these ones. But overall, much better product. I think it leads to a lot better product in the playoffs because they shook the tree enough. And I think a lot more teams are going to have a fire lit under them to compete moving forward. Let's get into it.
I need all the wins, yeah. Ain't no L's, I gotta get a no call and quits, yeah. Gotta keep on moving no matter how hard.
Here comes Danny Tusizawa, back to Baker, Baker with the fin. Kurt Baker in for DC, and this may well do it old glory with the try. The New Zealand Sevens legend, Kurt Baker with the cherry on top.
Can you believe it?
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the On the Line Rugby Podcast, a show brought to you by the Believe Sports Network. I'm your host, Nagaishi, and welcome back. As I said in the cold open, I am so sorry about last week to preface this, okay? I recorded a whole half-an-hour episode, had it all chopped up, and for whatever reason, if you're watching the visual companion, you'll be able to see this. There is no audio on that track. There is no audio from my recording suite that I got. This microphone has no memory card internally, so everything was on that baked file coming out of that streaming client and nothing on that. So sorry about that. That was a chock-full episode of just roasts and content for you guys, but such is life. Here we go again. For all those who don't like the background, I think that we're going to use this as I am now moving to design hopefully a decent looking set. Hopefully I get a desk in, we can kind of get a little bit more formal than sitting on a couch cushion. But this is what we got right now. Beautiful Apple Park. Honestly, it blends in very well versus the portrait mode, so I think I'll just use this from now on. But back into the product. As I said, a lot of good product in this cold open. I think we'll start off with the worst games that I thought were I mean, my bar for this week is a lot better. I think that these games are still above average, but had a lot of, as I said, winnable, lackluster play that led to a lot of games being lost. We'll just do with Moana versus the Blues. I think the biggest thing is they got mollywopped. The Moana, they brought in a good team. They had a very fiery revenge game this week with former head coach Tano Umaga coming over to Mount Smart. They're now next door neighbors to his former team. A lot of boys wanted to play for the Blues or, maybe were castaways coming into this game. So this is a lot of stakes personally for them. And this game did not end, let alone start the way I really anticipated. I expected this game to be very tight. Maybe Moana wins by 3-5. Unfortunately, they got, their behinds handed to them, for advertisers' safe content. Cough, cough. I think for starters, I don't think anyone wanted to work on their one-on-one tackling as much as Moana did and didn't do this week. They put 3-4 in the breakdown, which I thought was really good. They helped slow down the ball. But also, against the Blues, if you're not working really hard on that wing, you're going to get burnt by some of these guys like Caleb Clark, Mark Talea, and those boys. And, we saw that day in and day out just, getting broken. And on top of that, they got beat so bad in the first place on top of that because they weren't obeying the power of the Blues. I think the more people understand where I come from with this, the easier it'll be. When I mean respecting the power, these guys are going to come and get these extra meters. Now, that doesn't mean obviously throwing more people into the breakdown, but that also means getting these people back, getting harder, more dominant tackling on, getting them wrapped up the right way so they don't escape out, cough, cough, Dalton Papali'i, and run for another 10 meters. All these things really matter in any contact sport. And in rugby, especially when you're on a one-on-one tackle the whole game, basically, you break that one-on-one, you're basically more likely than not, unless you're a prop, guaranteed to be gone. And especially with the support players, and there's not a lot of people that can really form that line as fast as you'd like. So I think Moana needs to work on that, and that's how they got beat in the first place. On top of that, most of the tackles weren't even wraps; they were just arms and power. If they were any higher, I think they would have got some cards in there. But luckily they weren't, and stayed relatively clinical in that sense. I think also the Blues did a lot of good job on ripping and loose ball because they just wanted to keep fumbling away when they were in transition to the gold zone, which is for me the 22 in of your opponent's line. And then obviously 15 of those were in transition in the gold zone. So not a good look there for Moana. Obviously, because of this and their 10 penalty disparity in those situations, Moana really wasn't able to really capitalize on their 622 visits, whereas the Blues pretty much did consistently. Obviously, with Bowden Barrett on there, you're more likely than not going to leave with points, and that's exactly what happened. I see this as no excuse, as this game was entirely winnable with Moana. I really thought they won the set piece margin greatly, and the territory margin, obviously. Time of possession was also on their side. They just didn't make the most of the time that they had with the ball, and it's going to improve, I think, in future years, but I think this year, I can't harp on this much more than I already have. Work on your one-on-one tackling, work on your ball security and your penalties. You'll be a much better team for it, and because of this, we're going to move on into the Drua, who continue their slide in the zoo, as the boys from Otago, I thought, did a good job getting the monkey off their back this week. I was so shocked with the Landers managing to stay in the lead the whole game for once. I think that really speaks volumes of the Drew at the moment with their quality of play. It's just going to go back to Glenn Jackson and what I'm going to say later. But obviously, the Drew somehow continue the dark road of just being too tight or overshooting out wide, or just being too wide and overshooting in and missing their tackles. I don't understand how they can do that, given the quality of their team and the athletes. They shouldn't have to be doing this. I think their communication needs to be better. This goes down to, like I said, Tivitan Canavere and the rest of their team's coaching staff, just to get the boys to be firing in the right way. And I don't think they're doing a good job at that as of right now. Excuse me. And obviously, imagine only getting 2.4 points from 722 visits. I think that's insane to me. When you're looking at, there was once a time, even last year, where the Drew were able to lose the carry margin. They were able to lose the penalty margin. They were even able to lose the tackle margin. And somehow they were able to get, lead in 22 visits and lead in points and conversions, because they were so electric. And for whatever reason this year, we haven't seen that. They also used to, in this game specifically, led the game possession with 59% overall, 67% in the last 10 minutes, which is insane that you don't leave with more points than what you did. The Landers team this year, as I've said, is a very beatable team, lacking a lot of pieces to really push them over the hump. And this Drew team could have came in there with, I would argue, moderate favorites and took this game over, but they just didn't. They also used to blow away people, and I'm so disappointed in that, as they don't hit like that in dominant tackle anymore. They're trying to be, I'm guessing from Glenn Jackson's coaching, a lot more safe, conservative with their approach to tackling, and it's leading to these non-powerful hits that were allowing an offload. They're allowing guys to hit power meters, and they're used to, I'm not going to say suck at the set piece margin, but they used to be a little bit downtrodden when it comes to the lineup play. They dominated the set piece margin. In fact, getting 25% of the opposing scrums and 14% of their opposing lineouts. So I thought that was good. But somehow, minus the relative discipline and the card, 32 turnovers in back-to-back weeks is not good looks. This team was heavily brought on by turnovers. If they could easily get this monkey off their back, they'd be fine. And I think because of that, you need to fire Glenn Jackson. Now, you lost Vern Carter to the Blues. You lost your former coach for the last 3 years to coach the Fijian national team, which I thought was rightfully deserved, did a great job, was a rightful successor to Vern Carter. But now having Glenn Jackson, who was, I know, yes, a former player, obviously a former referee. He's not brought a lot of things to the table with the Drua. And honestly, I think this team is regressing more than they are progressing. So because of that, you had his whole season, was it 19 weeks to really get the ball moving. He's not doing anything within the last 9 weeks, which is 2.5 months of play. I think this team is looking very ill-prepared. They were hemorrhaging talent out the wazoo because of Europe, especially the URC. And when you're looking at it, you need to act now to save your homegrown talent, to make Fijian brand of rugby, which always brings sold-out crowds, always bring the most passionate people into the sport. I would argue everybody likes to watch the Fijians. And if you don't have flying Fijian flair, which the Blues are doing in spades because of Vern Cotter, can you call yourself a Fijian team? Go back to your brand. Take all these improvements that Glenn Jackson has brought to the table and put that into the finished product. I've been asking for this for years at this point, not only on this podcast, but also socially. They were this piece away. Now, it's like a weird relationship. So to compare it, you ever heard of the 90-10 rule? A guy, in this case for relationships, which is what I'm comparing it to, can have 90% of what the girl wants. But that 10% that the girl wants and the guy doesn't have is what she'll leave him for. And the next person will be 10% of what they really wanted, but 90% of what the other guy brought that he doesn't bring to the table. And when you're looking at it, you had Vern Cotter. I'm really blanking on that former coach's name, but his name in there as well, who had 90%, everything what the Fijian drew and the Fijians needed as a team. Very on brand, good coaches, brought a lot of fire to this team. And then you have Glenn Jackson, who has that 10%. You left them, or they left you, and now you have your next shooter, Glenn Jackson. Again, quality ref, maybe just not cut out to be a head coach in terms of having that 10%, but you're missing everything else. Was it really worth to let them leave, to let your talent leave for the Premiership, for the URC, for other Super Rugby teams? And it's going to continue to happen. And if you're not progressive enough and not putting the ball forward, and this goes also to the Fijian government, the Fijian Rugby Union, the Australian Rugby Union, in fact, as well, because they're part of the Australian Conference, to really get this ball moving. And if they don't, it's going to continue to roll in a bad direction. This is something I think people should think about. They should look up. I think, historical meters. I've done it. I'm not going to go into it. It'll take me forever to do. But the more this would happen, the easier it will be. I think some good quality candidates you could maybe link into would be Leon McDonald. One could argue, what is his name? Not Clayton McMillan. Supposedly, Sam Kane is looking into coaching. You could have him be your defensive coach. You could have a bunch of the guys from the Wallabies head coaching staff, former, and New Zealand head coaching staff now in Japan. You have Steve Hansen, Scott Hansen. You have, a lot of people wouldn't say quality coaching on Ian Foster's part, but Ian Foster could be there if you bring in Steve Hansen. You could bring in the head coach of the Kentetsu Liners. You could bring in the head coach of, whose name I'm blanking on right now, but he was the head coach of the Wallabies for a while. He was also the assistant for the All Blacks when they won their big championships in the World Cup with Ma'anonu, Dan Carter, and those boys. You have the Panasonic Wildlands head coach. Again, same pedigree. You have a lot of options. You just need to bring in the money, obviously, and promise the institutional and infrastructural capability that they'll need to coach a quality team. I don't think it would be that hard for them to come back home or closer to home. Fiji is a great place to be. Beautiful climate, kind people, great beaches. Everybody knows this. And quality tourist attractions and food. All you need is a hungry head coach. You have the fans. You have the government fully behind you. I think every game this week we've seen all of Parliament there. Thankfully, a lot of tourists there as well. Use this as a galvanizing thing. Everybody wins. I think this would be a good shot for Fiji to really rise up the ranks from a borderline tier 1 team, which is just a good spoiler and everyone likes to watch, to now a quality team that I think can challenge the world. A lot of the islands' talent gets stolen by Australia, by Fiji, by France, by England, Japan somewhat now. I think of the islands, like what Moana Pacifica was the reason why it was created and why Fijian Drua was really brought into prominence, was to keep this homegrown talent home, to broaden that knowledge that this team has, which is why you brought in so much international talent that were a little older, a little bit more seasoned. Same thing with Moana. Same thing with bringing in Tano Umaga as the head coach, what their staff is like for Moana. This team could be the same thing. And I would argue much better quality because the athletes are so much better. The players are so much better. The fans are more invested. The government is more invested. And the rugby unions on both New Zealand and Australia are both more invested. So you have the pull to make it happen. They just need to be more progressive in it. And I think that starts with the government. It starts with the rugby union in Fiji. And I think once they do that, they'll be all set. But enough of me placating my idea of getting the best coaching staff in the world to coach in Fiji. Let me break into the Reds, who I thought really screwed the pooch, versus a very winnable game versus the Brumbies. Don't ask me how, obviously, how this happened with a dominant defense and the physical, offense of the Reds. On top of that, the Brumbies, who didn't use what I would consider their greatest weapon, their electric backs. If you're looking at not just the fantasy line, but just in general, Lenny Kitao, Andy Muirhead, Corey Toole outside of that one try, and obviously, Tom Wright weren't really that used this whole game. And, it was a forward-driven game the whole way through. Billy Pollard, I think, scored a hat trick this game. He did really well. Obviously, destroying the attack margin in a good way. They somehow let the Brumbies, who I thought didn't have a lot of juice in the attacking margin, 12, 22-meter visits, which is obviously not conducive into winning footy. You also have the Reds king in an offload and tackle prior to the ruck forming, which led to turnover, which obviously paid dividends for them. I think the problem was that they just didn't also work on their breakdown speed, and that cost them dearly. The Brumbies' ruck speed stayed around 0 to 3 seconds, whereas the Reds slumped between 3 to 6 or high 2s, low 3s at lowest, more often than not. I think the game boils down to two things: penalties and turnovers. And obviously, another winnable game for the Reds, who screwed the pooch and lost another game versus what I would argue they could have been moderate favorites in. And I think for my team of the week this week, pretty simple. Not a lot of explanation, but we'll break it down. You got my team of the week. You have Angus Bell. No explanation there. I think I've done 9 weeks of good explanations with that. Ioane Moananu, outside of the tries, threw great line on ball, powerful in the tackle, and continues to be, push a all-black captain, Cody Taylor, to the bench, which is insane. I think his young rise will continue to go. I don't think this guy will plateau. Small, very hungry, very, very fiery young forward, and I think he'll be there for a while. Tamaiti Williams, who I think makes his first debut into my team of the week for this year. On top of the try, good IQ, good power, did a good job with his lifts, timed it perfectly. I thought he did well with Ioane Moananu to really get these lineouts firing against a very solid team. And obviously, Scott Barrett deserves to be in there. The captain has come back into full form of these last couple of weeks. I haven't really looked into bringing him in into my team of the week, but I think he makes his debut this year as well. He just played exceptionally well at the tackle, dominant game management when it comes to passing the ball at the right time. Same thing with Tom Hooper, good at lineouts. I think he just needed to be in here just for that and set piece alone. Christian Leo Willie, solid ball running, crashing it straight, good lineup performance, and as well as, powerful tackle at the scrum. Peter Lakai, great IQ. This whole game on top of his powers is great IQ. He's going to continue to push inroads into the team of the comp. I think over the last couple of weeks, we started to see the resurgence of the Hurricanes loose forwards that needed to be there. Same thing with Longy Gleason, no explanation there. Teddy Wilson, no explanation. Lawson Creighton, I thought he deserved to be in here because of his management. Just kick tennis, just now realizing it. I haven't gone into the Taws or the Canes, so I'm going to need to go into that. But as for that, movement of the ball, management of the game, Lawson Creighton deserved to be in here. I thought Kyron Tui Molofao deserved to be in here from Wana Pacifica just for his powerful ball running and great high ball skills. Peter Maga Jensen, great defense, great knowing when to pass the ball, good lines. Joseph Suali'i, Andrew Kellaway, no need for explanation. Jacob Ratav Maitevuki Neepkins deserved to be in this 15. Why, you ask? Because he's been out for a little over 2.5 months. Simple. Great management. He helped propel this team in attack to victory. And on top of that, when he was called upon in defense, did a good job at that. I thought that the stalwart, Alan Alatoa, deserved to be in here. Captain of the Brumbies team with James Slipper, deserved to be in the 16 spot. Did a good job at scrums. Great power at goal line ball. Billy Pollard deserved to be in here as well. George Bauer, great power. Good, nice ball running. Didn't really pass. Didn't really do a lot of magical stuff, but was just good as a prop. I can't complain. Deserved to be in here. Jamie Hanna, if Tom Hooper wasn't in this top 15, he would be up in that 5 spot, making a Crusader, almost fully Crusader pack. Great play, good lineout speed, great pod play. I think that's underrated for a forward is how they play in the pods, how they manage their space, how they run support lines, delay their lines, how they play off of each other. Jamie Hanna did a great job of that. Bobby Valentini, Bobby V, outside of the power that he brings, we're starting to see that, kind of raw, exuding aura from Bob Valentini start to come back after his injury. He's going to continue to rise. Cam Roygard, no explanation there. Leroy Carter, needed no explanation, but great support on his running play. Loved watching that. Will Jordan, good job at that. Before we leave, let me go into the teams that I did not cover, and that is my bad. We have the Satyrs finally winning against a very pressed Canes side. Despite what I would consider the gap defense by the Satyrs, especially in the comms, it just wasn't that great when it came to comms. I thought the Canes really did a quick pop with vision to make inroads and make that happen to push this team forward. On top of that, for the Crusaders, just bad pass accuracy. A lot of no looks, a lot of expecting someone's going to be there. Almost feels like egotistical passes. Like this team is so clinical that it shouldn't happen, but it did. On top of that, with the Canes line speed and just pod delay off the breakdown, it was a perfect storm. Pun intended, for most of the Satyrs to be on the back foot. I want someone to explain to me, though, just why the audience, why us in the audience had to deal with 11 trips to the gold zone, but only netting 2.1 points per average. That was a little questionable. One could argue it was just penalties, but, I think there's a lot more to that I think someone needs to explain to me a little bit better, because that was insane. We did a lot of good footy. Obviously, the Canes, who are normally electric with Ruben Love at the helm, were really silenced at the line breaks, and just electric chips went dead, which led to obviously a Satyr takeover. When you have guys like who have been there before, like a Severis, like a Will Jordan, like a David Havili, this game becomes much easier overall, and that kind of play will take over, and that's exactly what happened in the second half. The Canes, I thought, just have to do better, taking better opportunities and chances on their opportunities with turnover prowess. They got 10 turnovers, and their D looked good, but they just didn't work out. There's a lot to improve on. I think this will be a loss for the Canes, a little bit of regression from Clark Laidlaw's side, who I thought could have been easy champions for this year. Being that as it is, solid team. Hope we can see them better next year. I don't think this season is just theirs this year. Obviously, for the Taws, bravo to you guys. You take a bow in the huge win versus the Chiefs, who many thought, and I won't name names, but you know who you are. New Zealand and America aside, just wrote them off and said that their season was over. To do that at home, who are now undefeated at home, with their backs against the wall, to move them up the board and play spoiler was huge. I don't know how the Chiefs choked this bad with a 81% win probability with a resurgent set piece squad. I've missed the Taws playing like this in open field. This team is battered. It is beaten. One could argue this is the long step on a regressive turn for them this year. And they took the right steps, and they did what they were supposed to do and got back on brand. And guess what? Things happen. It's the same thing with the Canes. 7 gold visits, 2 points average. Shaking my head, with this. To compare with the Taws, they went 6 times, got 3.5 points. Not a lot more, but I think everyone knows basic math and law of averages. Anything is better. And, the ratios are going to be better as well. Despite that, Taws kind of having a problem with post-contact meters, as they always have, to the Chiefs, despite a despicable amount, which is really terrible, is like 268 meters primarily. They did the exact same thing, was 262 actually. 268, they got primarily off the back of Joseph Suali'i, who did a lot of those post-contact meters for them this whole game. I think he was the MVP of this easily. I think the Taws also did exceptionally well, is that they haven't in prior matches, really is turnover at the tackle. They got 5 out of 23 of the turnovers in the tackle, 10 offloads post the tackle on the offense side, which is huge and promising from this young group. The Chiefs didn't take any proper shots that the Taws didn't counter, which I think I'm super impressed by, because, despite losing 18 turnovers and a yellow card this game, it coincided with a set piece margin, totally being decimated. This team took a final step in the right direction. And I think this team is going to be, like I said, I have not lost confidence in this team. It's faltered a little bit, but I've not lost it. This team went on, can push itself into farther boundaries that I thought could never be asserted.